Are you ready? Today, we're going to talk about this bike right here in front of me. The 2022 Pivot Shuttle. Now, Pivot's been in the e-bike game a while. The Shuttle's been around a while. There's been a few iterations. I'm actually thinking they're probably due for a change soon, but buddy of mine, he bought one. I got a chance, I ride wrapped it, I got it all set up, and I got a chance to ride it so I could see what this bike was like compared to some of the other e-bikes I've ridden in its current iteration that you can go buy right now. So we're going to knock through the specs real quick. You can get on Pivot's website. You know, you can get all that information however you want. I'll compare it to other bikes in another video. So subscribe to the channel and hit that bell if you want to see all the e-bike comparisons that are coming. I've done the Levo. I've got the Sight to do. I've got the Levo SL, the Kenevo SL. I've got a Giant Rain, and I've got the aluminum Levo and the S-Works Levo, which are dang near identical bikes, but there are a few nuances, and then I've got some other stuff coming. So, and of course this Pivot Shuttle, and we'll start talking about some of the differences and the good and the bad on these bikes. Let me jump through the specs real quick. This is a size medium. The bike is right around 50 pounds. I didn't weigh it, but it's going to be really close. The seat tube is 16.8 inches or 42.4 centimeters. That's a little taller than a lot of bikes, so that's a 150 mil dropper. You might get a 170. You might bottom out with the insertion depending on your height. So I don't know there, but it isn't just a simple longer dropper system. It's a 64.3 degree head tube angle, and that's with a 160 fork and a 140 rear travel. The seat tube is 74 degrees, so it's not very steep by today's standards. The chainstay is 17.4 inches long, or 44.1 centimeters. That's long. That's a pretty long chainstay. The bottom bracket is 35.8 centimeters or 14.1 inches. A little taller bottom bracket. Standover height is 28.1 inches or 71.5 centimeters. And the wheelbase is 1,214 millimeters or 47.7 inches. So it's a reasonably length wheelbase. Not too long on that. And the reach is 440 millimeters, which for a size medium is about 15-ish millimeters shorter or more, give or take, than most bikes today. So on the website, they call this bike progressive geometry. It probably was at some point, and Pivot is very much known for their progressive geometry, but I would call this trail bike geometry, and there's nothing wrong with that. So we're going to get into why I think this bike actually rides really good, pros, cons, who's the bike for, and kind of my overall take on the bike. So the build on this one is an SLX XT. It's $95.99. SLX brakes, SLX shifter, XT rear derailleur, SLX cassette. This bike doesn't have the same wheels they show on the website. It's got the hybrid 1900s with 370 hubs. They work really good. This is a nice wheel set. One thing this bike does have that is super cool is Galfer rotors. Galfer rotors are not common on bikes. They are awesome. I love them. They make amazing rotors. They make amazing brake systems for motorcycles, dirt and street, and bikes. And they got a brand new e-bike compound, so throw a little e-bike compound pad with these rotors, and I think you've got one heck of an amazing braking system on this bike. The SLX brakes, they worked really well. It is a Fox Float X Performance. There's no adjustability in the compression, just a lever for basically open or closed, really firm. And then you have rebound adjustability. It rides pretty good. Again, if you want more adjustability, you'll need something else, but that thing rode really well. It is a Fox 36 160 mil grip damper. The grip damper, if you're familiar, has detent clicks of firmness, so you basically go from locked out and then one click at a time to open. That's your only adjustability on compression. The compression tune is preset and you're just closing the needle, so you don't have any ability to manipulate the compression tune there, but overall it rides pretty good, and you do have rebound, the rebound tunability, so you can get that going. KS Lev seat post, and it's got Maxxis Hasegai 2.5 in the front and a Maxxis DHR2 on the rear. They're both in Exo Plus casings and the Pivot e-bike saddle. You can tell they're e-bike saddles. They got that little tail in the back. Super comfortable saddle, by the way. Here's my thoughts on the build. it can be a little tough because the bike actually worked awesome. But for me, at the price point, I think, wow, you know, those parts, you'd think there'd be like a grip 2 damper in that fork. Maybe a performance fork is fine. There's nothing wrong with it, right? You don't need Kashima. It's not a requirement in this world. The benefit to most riders is negligible, if any, other than longer intervals between services because you're less likely to damage the harder coating from scratching it. But a grip 2 damper would make a big difference on this bike in the front end and really bring it to life. But that's kind of nitpicking in the build. The rear shock works fine. All you do is go up to a factory, get more adjustability. Essentially, all you do with this is get more adjustability. The SLX brakes are awesome. The SLX shifter is really good. It has a trigger shifter like an XTR, so that was really nice. That's a huge improvement because before only XTR, and then I think maybe XT had it for a while, but now it doesn't matter which shifter you're on. You can shift with the thumb or the finger, and then the other is just thumb. But that forward shifter can be trigger shifted, which I really like. I think that's awesome. It's how I prefer to shift. It's how I've shifted forever. When they did Axis with trigger, I thought that was pretty awesome. The other thing is it shifts so smooth with such a smooth push. On an e-bike, I just can't even imagine upgrading that to XTR other than if you want to save weight. I guess if you could save a lot of weight, it might be worth it for range and maybe for some playability, but otherwise I don't see the benefit. I'm not a big fan of the Fox lever for the dropper mixed with the KS lev. I think the ratio's off, so it's not just I've got this thing really adjusted, so if you turn the dial anymore, the seat will start to creep down. So when you push that thumb, you have to push it a little further to get that thing to actuate. I'm a little unimpressed with that, but you know, a Fox, you know, the ratios might be a little off there, but otherwise it works. It's just not as smooth as I would like it to be. Again, the saddle's super comfortable. The wheels are great wheels. The rotors, again, are spectacular. Tires on this build. I don't like Exo Plus tires on a bike, but if you're only going to trail ride this bike, they'd be fine. If you got into rocky stuff or rooty stuff, plus I'd get rid of the Assegai. Build-wise, I don't like that tire, and I don't like it on this bike. Let's talk about what the geometry numbers mean that I gave you, because you read the marketing, you hear the other reviewers who are being paid to say what they're supposed to say by the manufacturers, and they all like lower, longer, slacker, reach, more reach, more reach, more reach. You know, they have a message and they beat it, and then they punish that message 6 months later. The reality is this bike's really good. No, it's not a long reach bike, but it works really well in this format, on this ride. Because the seat tube angle isn't as steep, you also don't need as long of a reach. I would consider this bike a really neutral rider's bike, and I'll get into that when I talk about how the bike rode, but this bike is really neutral. It's nimble, it's very playful. You know, the 64.3 degree head angle works really well on this bike. It's slack enough that it can actually handle some pretty good downs within reason, and some of the other parts might actually improve that, but overall the bike, you know, rode really well, and the overall geometry, if you're a beginner or intermediate, is really good. It's really, really comfortable that way. You kind of sit upright, you're really relaxed. When you stand up, you don't feel like you have to hunch on the bike. So that stuff about the bike I actually liked. So it might not be progressive, but you know what? Not every bike needs to stick the reach as far out as possible, because not every rider belongs out over the front wheel all the time. For a lot of people, that's a very uncomfortable place to be. Let's talk about how the bike rides. It's an easy climber, so we'll just talk about the climbing. Because of its position, it's really comfortable. You just pedal along. Cross-country bikes and down-country bikes and trail bikes still aren't getting super steep seat tube angles. They don't need them. You're not going to pop the front wheel up all the time, and you don't have all that bob going on, and you don't have to jack the seat way forward to get efficiency. So from that perspective, you sit, you pedal, you spin, it climbs really well. It's got no real bad characteristics that way. Until it gets technical and steep, then the bike struggles because of the slack seat tube angle because of the normal seat tube angle, and because of the shorter reach. The front wheel starts to feel light, and on really sharp switchbacks, you really notice it. You've got to manage your weight. But these are uphill, real tight switchbacks, and that's when I started to notice it. But the high bottom bracket meant when you climbed through rocks, you could pedal and you didn't pedal strike. So the high bottom bracket becomes a benefit on this bike in the climbing, and it wasn't a big detriment in the descending or the regular riding. So overall, I think from a climbing perspective, this is a really capable and comfortable bike, and it's going to climb all the green and blue, beginner, intermediate, and even easy black, hard blues. It's going to handle all that stuff really well. Talk a little bit about descending. The bike comes down really well. It actually leans really easily, and overall, because of the reach, if I wasn't pushing hard, you could steer in a little bit if you wanted to. I mean, that's something you can definitely do on a 27.5 that's harder on a Niner. Niners, you need to dip the shoulder in harder. But the bike leaned, it steered, it did all the things you wanted it to do. You could slow down and manage tight spots. You could speed up and flow with this bike. In the descending position, it is a very neutral bike. You don't want to get way back. I did test this just to see what would happen, and you start to really lose the front. It doesn't like you being on the back end. It's not terrible, but in a normal trail, it doesn't like it. So if you're a slide back rider, you'll notice that. If you're a rider who likes to jump out over the front wheel, it doesn't like that very much either. That short reach, it gives you a lot of leverage on the front end when you come forward, and you sort of, it wasn't that hard to start to shove the front wheel down the trail. So I came into a berm fast, I leaned over, and I went to come out of the berm, and I stayed up on the front, and I could feel the tire pushing down the berm a little bit, like tucking the front end a little bit. And so I just moved my weight a little bit, and it caught, and I rode right out. But it didn't like you pushing real hard on the front end. This is very neutral, and I think for a huge majority of riders, that neutral body position is really going to work well. You're always going to feel comfortable on this bike. You're not going to feel like a bike that really wanted you forward and you slid back on is about to, throw you on the ground, or vice versa. That neutral rider position worked really well. If it gets really steep, I think this bike would struggle. You're definitely going to want to let 4 or 5 or 6% of the air out of the back if you're going to ride it in the steeps, because it is so neutral. It's not. You're going to want to get that back end down some more on this bike. And so I think I noticed that on a couple, like there's a trail I came in, I rode Talon Show on it, for those of you that know that, in Nevada City, and there's the jump that comes in and sort of drops down. And when I dropped down, I noticed that it wasn't as stable as I would have liked as it landed and rolled out, and I think a lot of that just came down to that really short reach, or that more compact, more upright landing. You weren't naturally as low on the bike. The bike has great flow. It floats on the trail. That was really impressive. So little doubles and hop jumps and all that. It's super playful. You can roll up and jump around and have a really good time. And from that perspective, this bike was spectacular. It is 140, 160, puts it dead in the trail bike category. It rides like a really good trail bike. It is super fun that way. So if you're mostly a trail rider, you love to ride a lot of the blues, which is a lot of what we have. I mean everything in Auburn, everything in Nevada City. I mean, there's a lot of stuff is a blue around here. A lot of stuff in Tahoe's a blue. An intermediate trail, whether it's a harder or an easier intermediate, a lot of that stuff. This bike is going to tackle all that stuff well, and it's going to do a lot of the jumps really well. It was really balanced in the air, and it didn't have any squirmy characteristics on landing. It was just a really good bike. I mean, I was really impressed with all that all the way around. I still think that getting rid of that Assegai off the front and going to a Minion downhill front would, not only for battery range, because there's no reason to have the Assegai on there, it doesn't roll that well. I still think a Minion outperforms it at speed. Cons real quick on the bike. The big one for me, you can see it when you look at it. Where do you put a water bottle? On e-bikes, you can go do these 15, 20-mile rides that take an hour, hour and a half, because you can attack the climb so efficiently. You have a lot of help, and so you can do these rides, and that's a water bottle. Hour and a half's a water bottle. You can, stick an EDC tool on there, strap a tube with a small first aid kit and all that stuff somewhere, which I think there's kind of room for that. But the lack of a water bottle is something that's really interesting to me, and it is a con for me. I think that it would have been nice to have that, and especially for an e-bike. Every e-bike I've ridden, I've done lots of water bottle rides. I rode Downeyville the other day on this bike with a water bottle, and that was from Sierra City all the way up and all the way down. you just can, and so that would be a really nice feature if they make some changes to this bike, is to maybe do that. But the down tube is massive on this thing, so there's really nowhere for one. There's two more things. One, the tires. I think double downs would have been a better choice. I get they're trying to save some weight, but I think with an e-bike, you do tend to quickly advance and you start to push a little faster, and so you get tire squirm with the Exo Plus. That's part of why I think I experienced front wheel tuck, because I was actually rolling that Osagai tire on the rim. And before I get the, oh, you must have only ran low pressure. No, I actually, on this bike, because it was Exo Plus, ran 28 in the back and 26 in the front, which is really high for me, even on an e-bike, and I just don't think they're the best choice. But if you're a lighter rider and you're just trail riding, you're probably never going to notice this. Grip 2 damper. I think you can just throw a Grip 2 damper in this. I would just upgrade the damper. I'd give myself a little more control over compression. That's going to increase the front end traction. Pros of the bike. This bike is really well balanced. It's incredibly playful and fun. It's really easy to maneuver. Kind of like an analog bike, you almost feel like you can just change lines on the bike. I thought that was really impressive. I felt like you could lift the front end really easily, which I was surprised considering the length of the rear chainstay. So that tells me a little bit of a shorter reach gives you a little bit of leverage on the front end to lift it. I thought that was really good. So for me, that playfulness was a huge pro on this bike, and it really allowed you to have a good time on this bike. The jumping and the popping and the messing around was it was really fun the whole ride. I had a great time on it. The other thing is it's pretty quiet, and the wheels, great wheels. Those hybrid 1900s are great wheels. 370 hubs are tough, and the Galfer rotors. Bravo Pivot. That's a fantastic upgrade. For those of you who are just getting into learning and understanding your braking systems, you'll hopefully someday throw some Galfer rotors on your bike. Who is this bike for? Well, stick, dead horse, someone who wants a trail bike. I've called it a trail bike as many times as I can, and that's exactly who this bike is for. You want a really efficient motor. I mean, this is an EP8 motor. It is the really nice screen. Everything works really well. The EP8 motor is really efficient against the 726 watt-hour battery. I did 17.4 miles at 1,847 feet of climbing on one lap, and I was down 2 bars, and I just dropped past 2 bars, so I was probably 55 to 60%, somewhere in there in the battery life, 55%, which means I could do a second lap and still have enough battery that I had no range anxiety on that last climb back out. So I think you could easily get about 35 miles and about 3,700 feet of climbing out of this battery and motor combo, and that's awesome. I think if you don't realize how good that is, my buddy's Giant probably can get 1 1/4 laps. And that's with him in mode 3 of 5. In full turbo, I'm not sure that bike goes all that far. That's a test we still need to do. So this bike would go do Downeyville. You could actually easily start in Sierra City, or you could start in Downeyville and make the around and up and pry all the way back down, because that's about 32 miles. But you could do a full ride and then go charge the bike, and you wouldn't have to worry about whether or not you're going to run out of battery, and you don't need to shuttle all the way to Packer Saddle every time. Not that that's not awesome, but you just don't have to. Well, that's my thoughts on the bike. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. Please like the video, subscribe to my channel. If you want to ring the bell, that way you get notified anytime a new video comes out. I think that's really cool. This bike, I did completely ride wrap it for them. That was part of the deal, and I'm going to throw these on. These came today, so I can get the fork guards on. I decided to add that for them because, when you're a newer rider, falling over is a part of the game, and we're going to try to avoid lots of scratches by adding that stuff. So go out there, ride bikes, be rad, go enjoy the mountains, and I hope to see you out on the trails.